Another form of ripper is a compliment or an endearing type of towards something or someone. For example, my wife Autumn is a ripper, right? But for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to use the ripper to mean a murderer that mutilates their victims. A ripper, okay? The term ripper, as far as mutilation of their victims, comes from the Jack the Ripper case. You guys all familiar with at least a little bit about the Jack the Ripper case? Okay. In that case, from 1888 to 1891 in London, several prostitutes were killed over that period of time, and they were basically mutilated, and even to the point of evisceration, which means disemboweling, taking organs away, removing them from the scene. Okay. In this particular case, we have a ripper in Canada that went way above and beyond just mutilation, even above and beyond extreme mutilation. His name was Robert Pickton. Okay. He is known as the most notorious, prolific serial murderer in Canada's history. And we're going to get to that as far as why. You see that he was only convicted of 6 murders, but I'm going to show you that he was probably connected to dozens of murders over 20 plus years, okay? But anyway, that's what we're going to, and I'm going to use the Jack the Ripper case as a comparison to this current case that we're going to be talking about today. If you have any questions during, I'm fine. I'm about interacting, and I'll go ahead and address those if you forget. But at the end, we're going to have a question and answer, like for a couple minutes. So, okay? All right. Before I get to that, I want to note a couple of eerie coincidences for Halloween for you guys. Okay? The first one you might have picked up on. Anybody pick up on the first eerie coincidence? Today is Robert Pickton's 75th birthday. Did not know that when I prepared for this presentation. But today is his birthday, 75 years old. But here's the other coincidence. When I finally thought of the topic that I was going to present today, he was murdered in prison just after that. So there's some 2 eerie coincidences for you for Halloween, right? But you can take that, his death, as far as however you want it. Okay. All right, moving on. So Robert Pickton, what I'm going to do in this throughout is give you a timeline where I personally think is his life as a serial killer, and where his cycle of violence. Some of you may be familiar with the cycle of violence. But serial killers have a cycle of violence. Basically, when they start, okay, their first times of maybe criminal activity, maybe murder, and then they escalate in their activities. They get more and more, they want to fulfill that fantasy that they have. But what happens when they start getting more and more into their fantasies, they get sloppy, okay? They tend to get very sloppy, and more evidence becomes apparent, and it's easier to solve the case. So we'll see that in this particular case. This is a really unique situation as far as serial murder is concerned. Okay. Robert Pickton is known worldwide as the pig farm killer. Okay? Now, a lot of the information about Robert Pickton wasn't public until after the trial, several years after the trial and his conviction. But the unique thing about this case is, as far as serial murder cases, there's no bodies, okay? There's no crime scene. There's no witnesses. We just don't have anything until his arrest for an unrelated crime involving weapons, okay? So he was arrested February 5th, 2002, okay? from a warrant to search for illegal weapons based on tip from an informant. When they searched the farm that his family owned for years, they found additional things with names of prostitutes that had gone missing over the years. Okay? They also found blood evidence, but a good investigator, a good police officer will stop right there and then try to get a warrant for that related information. He was always a suspect several years prior for murders, or missing persons at least, okay? Along with this, and this is an interesting point in this case, are any of you familiar with the Green River Valley, Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, okay? This particular case was going on at about the same time in the area around Seattle, Washington. Gary Ridgway, which wasn't known at the time, the Green River Killer was his name, as far as his moniker that was given to him for dumping bodies of prostitutes in the river. But he was suspected of being connected to these missing prostitutes in Vancouver, Canada. Okay? So there's a lot of serial killers at this particular time and place. These are the 80s, 90s, a lot of serial killers, even in the area that we're going to talk about, were active as far as what they were doing. Okay? So everything that we talk about and see, it wasn't known until after the trial because it wasn't public. But of course, you do your research and you find out these things. And I'm going to go over his methods of operation, or how he performed, how he did and what he did as far as his activities, murders type stuff. Okay? So what Robert Pickton would do, he would take his truck and drive to the downtown east side area of Vancouver, one of the worst areas in Vancouver and even in North America. Okay? He would look for prostitutes. He would befriend prostitutes. He would stop and talk to them. He would even get out of his truck and go to the local hotels and bars and stuff. But he's more of a loner. He wanted to just talk to them from this truck. Okay? He would lure them into his truck. And of course, they're vulnerable, right? They're wanting to survive, to get paid. So a lot of them willingly went, but as we'll see in his history, he stank bad. He was a pig farmer, and he barely ever took a bath. He hated he just had to fear water. So his parents would send him to school without being bathed for weeks. Plus he worked on a pig farm day and night. So you can imagine the prostitutes who were wanting to get paid were reluctant to get in a truck that smells so bad. I don't know if you've ever smelled a pig farm, or any kind of farm for that matter, but it's bad. But they want to get paid. So he would lure them with drugs. Most of these prostitutes were indigenous to Canada, to Vancouver. They were addicted to drugs, so they needed to get paid to survive. So they would get in the truck. He would drive them 15 miles to his farm, his pig farm, in Port Coquitlam, Canada. It's basically a city in the metropolitan Vancouver area, okay? He would go into his trailer, and of course you can imagine his trailer, if he was like that, as far as his hygiene, his trailer was just a mess, right? And it was so bad. Animals would come freely from the farm through his trailer. There was manure, there was everything. So it was just a mess. He never took care of it. So he would take them back to the bedroom area, which is basically a sleeping bag on plastic, and they'd have sex, okay? During that encounter, they would either finish and move on to something else, or he would handcuff them, okay, and continue to rape them against their will, okay? Eventually, he would pull out a wire, thin wire, or a belt, and strangle them to death, okay? Or he would use a gun to shoot them in the head, okay? And the police did find a .22 caliber pistol that had a dildo on the end of it with DNA of several prostitutes. A dildo. According to Robert Pickton, he said the dildo was used as a silencer. But if you ever shot a gun, that would not work. It wouldn't silence anything. So, yeah, he would use, probably for other things, but he used maybe them to shoot them in the head. That's usually where they were shot. And then, once he killed them, he would drag them to a building, the slaughterhouse, basically behind the trailer, and slaughter them just like he would his pigs. Okay, exactly, using a saw and everything. Cut them in half. Okay, this is a sad story. He would take, sometimes he would take remains and just hide them on the farm and bury them. Sometimes he would take the remains and feed them to his pigs, because pigs will eat anything. He would sell them off, the parts. He would grind the meat, the human remains, along with pig remains, into ground beef and sell it to local butcher shops. Or he'd take, most of the time, you probably took remains in barrels to the rendering plant in downtown Vancouver, next to the downtown east side where he's picking up prostitutes. So, again, that's based on the evidence. That's kind of what I think happened over a 20-year period. But he got sloppy with this, okay? There were a few prostitutes that actually went with him, and he would let them go. And the reason why he let them go was they weren't doing drugs at the time. They refused drugs. They were trying to rehabilitate themselves. So he felt like they were good people and let them go. The ones he would kill would be the ones that weren't trying to make life better for themselves. So he had a real hatred for prostitutes. Now, where did that hatred, we're going to talk about his history, where did that hatred come from? Okay, not so, but I don't know if she was or not. I never found that out. But she wasn't. She was his mom. Actually, his mom and him got along really well. Okay, it was his father that was kind of I won't use any, I won't use any names for his dad, but his dad was a real thing, a work, yeah. So, again, calm me down. All right. So that was basically his method for killing these women who basically were in a vulnerable situation and they had little choice. They're kind of forced into that life unless they got rehabilitated, etc. Okay? So what we're going to do from this point on is I'm going to use a little bit of a comparison to Victorian England, London specifically, to Vancouver, Canada, as far as a foundation for prostitutes as victims of serial killers. Okay? And again, you'll see some little notes about some facts about prostitutes as victims in the United States, around the world, but we're going to compare England at the time of 1800 and 100 years later to Vancouver, which should have evolved, right? We should have been protecting these women, doing the right things. But there's a lot of failures. I imagine society still today has some bias against vulnerable populations, like the poor, the homeless, prostitutes. We still have that to an extent today. And the police should never have that. The criminal justice system should never have that. But in this case, they did, okay? Which was sad because they could have saved a lot of lives, okay? So let's look at London, England in 1888. All right. The map is a little hard to see. I got my little handy-dandy pointer, okay? All right, London in 1888 was considered the richest, most powerful city, not only in Europe, but the world, okay? This was during the Victorian era where there was a movement to reform social ills, specifically in the concentrated population areas of London, but it was for the whole country, okay? This map is a map of the metropolitan area of London, okay? This is, some of you may have heard the term East End, okay? This would be the East End of the metropolitan area of London. This would be the West End, right? The West End girls, East End boys. You've heard that song, right? Okay, and this would be the city of London, like the city center, the business center, okay? This area right here was extremely impoverished. Like I said, it was the most rich and most powerful city probably in the world, but in Europe for sure. This was the most impoverished area in London, in Europe, and maybe in the world at this time, okay? Rife in all kinds of bad things, robbery, right? Thievery, prostitution for sure. Women were forced to be prostitutes, forced into prostitution because there were no jobs, and that's the only way they could survive. So women and children were forced into prostitution. In this small area, which is about, if you just look at this whole area, is about 3 square miles, okay? Population was so dense that on average there was 30 people to every apartment, okay? And they weren't just locals. These were immigrants from Russia, Jewish immigrants from Russia, Poland, and from Ireland because of the potato famine at the time. All these people were coming into London and it became more densely populated. What happens when that happens? Crime rates go up, more prostitutes. The police in this area were aware of 1,200 full-time prostitutes, okay? What do you guys see the different colors up here on this map? This is a poverty map of 1888. Could you notice do you notice the difference between these two areas? The black and blue represent extreme poverty, okay? You just didn't go here, right? It's a whole area. It's referred to as the Whitechapel area, Spitalfields. This is the East End. Look at the golden red. That represents the higher class, those with money, power at the time. Okay? Very clearly divided city, but considered the richest and most powerful. Okay? But what do we do with this population? We tend to do what? Marginalize them. Okay? Not just society, but who else? That shouldn't be. The police. So, was it common to have a prostitute found dead in the streets or in the River Thames for whatever reason, even murder? It was very common. What was uncommon was to find prostitutes dead, mutilated, torn apart, body parts missing, and completely where you couldn't recognize them. Okay? Jack the Ripper had an MO, and he learned his craft over years. He became better and better, but he also became more sloppy. Now, when I say him, I'm going to say her too, because we don't know. It's an unidentified serial killer. So I can take any serial killer or person at that time and make them a serial killer based on my opinion, based on what I find out. So I believe, now the general acceptance as far as how many victims Jack the Ripper had is 5. They're all often referred to as the canonical 5. Okay, I won't go into my personal opinion, but I believe there's 6. That's why I have 6 up there, because he's learning his craft. Probably a known surgeon, some type of occupation involving cutting up things precise. So based on all the evidence, even though it's undone, I know who I think it is, based on the police reports and what we have today. But a lot of people believe all kinds of, there's over 100 different suspects the police had, okay? Just for your information, my particular serial killer, who actually was a serial murderer, changed his method of operation after the Ripper murders stopped, okay? And he switched to killing his girlfriends or wives by poisoning them. So a lot of people think that serial killers don't switch their methods. I believe they do, and I'm sticking to it, okay? So we have a good idea of what's going on in London, okay? This actually is the only crime scene photograph taken during the Whitechapel murders. It is actually the worst one as well, okay? completely disfigured. The person, the murderer, would prop up body parts in certain spots around the body, just completely degraded the person after they were killed. Okay? Why do people go above and beyond? Anybody know the name or what that's referred to, go above and beyond killing somebody? It's called a signature. You guys heard of the wet bandits in Home Alone? Right? What were they? Burglars, right? Did it flooding the houses during people's Christmas and gifts, did that serve the burglary component of the crime? No, they went above and beyond what it took to complete the crime and flooded the house. Same, that's what a signature is. What is Robert Pickton's signature? Butchering his victims. It doesn't take butchering to kill somebody. He strangled them, shot them, and then butchered them, went above and beyond. Okay? Is someone insane to do that or not, legally? That's a good question, guys. 1% to 2% are not insane because they took substantial steps before, during, and after their crimes to commit their crimes. That takes a lot of thought, not a lot of mental. Now, do they have mental illness, maybe? Mental disorder? Some diminished capacity? Maybe. But did they know what they were doing? That's the key. Okay? So, poverty in 1888 in London. Any questions so far? Okay. So, another kind of look as far as a visual perspective of this. Anybody familiar with William Powell Frith? Anybody heard of him? This is a famous painting by William Powell Frith. He was a artist that looked at social things that were going on in communities, especially during the Victorian period. And he depicted this division of poverty and wealth. And he named his painting, what? Poverty and Wealth, 1880. You can see the clear distinction. Here's the poor, the impoverished. Here's the rich, the fortunates, you can call them, right next to each other. They weren't in reality, but that's showing how divided London was at the time. It was divided a lot of decades, but this is when the Jack the Ripper murders occurred. Okay, this right here is a depiction of the impoverished population, the worst street in London, considered to be the worst street, where one of the murders occurred, the one that I showed you, the crime scene photograph. This is where that murder, the worst street in London. Okay, trash everywhere, sewage going all over the streets, into the river, pollution from the factories, okay? Very low lighting because of the fog from these factories and the river. Hardly anybody had electricity. They used gas lamps, so you couldn't see it. It's a perfect ground, praying ground for a murderer, okay? Especially of a vulnerable population. Okay, so just a little depiction of 1888 London. All right. This is where we should have learned. 100 years, especially police and the criminal justice, 100 years since the Jack the Ripper murders. Look, this is just a few. Look how many people, look how many cases of serial murder alluded to Jack the Ripper murders. Even after up to 100 years later. They named him Jack this or Ripper this, even Jack the Ripper again. But the point is, all these, most of these that I put up here involved the murder of prostitutes. Okay? Why so many prostitutes murdered? Because they're a vulnerable population. And it's easier to attack, generally speaking. I'll give you a case example of one of these here in a second. It's just easier. But here's what happened. We did not learn that there's a really, 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 really good chance that if you're a missing prostitute, you disappear, or you're found murdered, what is there a great likelihood of as far as the offender? That they're a serial murderer, okay? When I worked in police, we didn't have a lot of prostitutes cases, but there was a few. But if I had someone missing that was a prostitute, and I think had common sense and cared a little, but most didn't or don't at sometimes, and it depends on the department or the area. But if a missing person, I had to take a missing person report, am I going to follow up and try to investigate that case? Absolutely. I'm not going to treat them any differently than anybody else. But that's what was going on, especially when we look at the Vancouver case with Robert Pickton, okay? So we have all these statistics about prostitutes and victims and why we pick prostitutes to murder, and not us, murders, serial murders. But here's just a few of since 100 years. We didn't learn a thing over 100 years. And that's just, I don't know what the word is, embarrassing. What else? Abhorrent, yeah. Okay, I'm into British serial killers. So just a selling point here, guys. I'm offering serial murders online this summer, if you're interested. It's a comprehensive look at serial killers, but I emphasize a comprehensive view of serial killing with British serial killers. So I'm going to emphasize not this one is used in class, but I'll use this one. The Yorkshire Ripper. How many have heard of the Yorkshire Ripper? Okay. Peter Sutcliffe. This guy was sadistic. He would take anything and everything to kill his victims. If he had a hammer, kill him. If he had a knife, or he'd bring it. Whatever he can use, okay, he would use to kill his prostitute victims. Okay? But he didn't start out like this. This is a big learning case. The 1980s, mid-1980s to, mid-1970s to 1980 was when he was when he perpetrated his crimes, was convicted of 13 murders and 7 attempted murders. He was sloppy, right? Richard Ramirez, he was Night Stalker, in America, just like him, he had a target, he'd go get it, attack them, and just be sloppy about it, and just wanted to kill them and do sadistic things to them. Okay, that was his MO. But he initially started attacking women and young girls. Okay, his thing was women and young girls, right? That was the whole thing for him, is to attack them. Okay, so he saw that was very difficult. Because why? They may still be considered a vulnerable population if they're alone, for sure. But are they considered a marginalized group, women in general? Well, some people look at it that way, but most people don't, right? He would switch to prostitutes because what he saw was they were very vulnerable and attracted to them. It was attracted to him. They were vulnerable to attack, easier. And he realized that police were very ambivalent towards prostitutes. They didn't care. So they would do some of the things like I told you, not report or make up a reason why they're gone, that type of thing, okay? So the lesson here was, did we learn anything? Yes, maybe, no, so, okay. All right, switching gears, a little bit about Jack the Ripper. Beautiful Vancouver. How many have been to Vancouver, or Canada for that matter? Beautiful, right? Most areas. Just like London, Vancouver, Canada was considered the richest city in Canada for sure, maybe North America, right? They even have a nickname. One of their nicknames, they have a lot, but one of their nicknames is Hollywood North. You know why? What does Hollywood say? Rich, actors. So they had that industry. They had the 3rd largest movie film TV industry in North America. Behind who? Los Angeles and New York. Pretty rich city, right? This is maps of Vancouver, and Vancouver is this area right here, okay? And the area of Port Coquitlam, the case that we're looking at, is right in here. So it's 15 miles from his farm to downtown East Side, okay? And this area was involved as well as far as evidence and things that we may get to, okay? But just like London, what also was the case? Most impoverished area, not only in Vancouver, in Canada, maybe in all of North America at this time in the 80s and 90s. So we're talking 100 years later, we haven't changed. This map kind of shows a change from 90 to 2015. See the darker area here? A little less as far as income being low, right? Less number of people. This area right here. This is the worst, still the worst area today. If you go to downtown Vancouver, to this 10-block area, you're going to find trash everywhere, and you're still going to find drug-addicted people. And this is, look at that, tents everywhere, homeless, prostitutes parading around. It still exists today. And you know who runs these things? Most of these. Who do you think runs these operations? Organized crime, okay? Gangs. The Hells Angels, you guys heard of the biker club? Hells Angels? They were running all of the criminal activity in this area, and most of Vancouver, okay? So it's hard to get from under all of this. It's hard to get, when there's limited beds, there's limited resources, it's hard for women that really don't have the chance to get out of being addicted to drugs, heroin at the time, crack. So it was really difficult, but it was just the exact same thing. Were prostitutes marginalized oftentimes in Vancouver, Canada, 100 years later? Are they going to be marginalized, the poor included, 100 years from now? I hope we don't have that. I hope it improves. But you know how society is. We're kind of self-indulged and don't care a lot about others for the most. We need to change that. Okay. Anyway, that was my little, and just in time for elections and stuff. All right. Anyway, so yeah, compared to the city, we have a lot of similar issues. All right. Contributing factors to his depravity. How many psychology people do we have or interested in psychology? Okay, this is for you guys. Okay, like the first slide, Robert Pickton was a very narcissistic, depraved psychopath. He didn't care anybody about it. He came out from the outside, he looked kind. He was kind to prostitutes, and he was kind to other people. He allowed people to move into the farm with him, and he gained some trust. But as soon as you went behind his back and he distrusted you, what did he do? He'd beat you up or he'd kill you. Okay? He held a grudge. Well, here, let's talk about his life real quick. Okay? He was born on a pig farm. He knew nothing else. Okay? He was born on a pig farm. His parents were terrible. Terrible parents. Even though he loved his mother, they were terrible parents. They made him and his brother and his sister, who eventually moved away when they didn't want to see the young girl be on the pig farm. They wanted her to have a better life, not Dave and Robert. Dave is his younger brother by a year. So they worked day and night, slopping pigs, slopping and other animals, doing all these chores around the farm. They hardly ever, like I mentioned earlier, never took a bath. And they sent to school like that. Okay? They were teased. They were shunned. Robert was especially shunned and alone and it was kind of awkward with people, especially girls. Now we're getting somewhere. He never, as far as I know, dated any but girl, had a girlfriend. He did have a fiance at one time that he was a pen pal with, went to visit briefly in Michigan, the only time he was in the United States, but came back. They never had any sexual relationship, but they were engaged. He never had sex with another woman. So what do you think he did? Well, who can I have sex and they're not going to turn me down? Prostitutes. And he was rich. Believe it or not, he had millions, especially after his parents died, his inheritance. He'd sell off parts of the farm and make millions. So he had the money. He was depraved. And what happened was he would increase the number of prostitutes that he lured and would kill over the years. Okay? Now, since he moved, and I'll get to the timeline here. Since he moved to the Coquitlam farm in Canada, just outside Vancouver, he became a kind of an apprentice of a meat butcher type thing. He became an apprentice, then eventually became full-time on the farm. But when his parents died, he sensed freedom, relief, and extra responsibility came with owning the farm. Okay? But here's the thing. Him and his mom were great. They loved each other. She was really harsh on the children. But in her will, guess what he left? He left all the children the same amount. Okay, they got some initial cash, including Robert, not very much, and basically said that Robert had to stay on the farm till he was 40 years old. At the time, it was 30 when his mother died. But he had to stay on the farm until he was 40 years old, and he couldn't go anywhere in order for him to get his inheritance, just like the other two kids. He was pissed because the other two got everything, and he had to wait. So he was, what happened? Was he loyal to his mom early? Yes. What happened when the will came out? He was angry, bitter. Okay? She was disloyal. Now, she was already dead and nothing, but he used that as a fuel, possibly, to attack other women, especially a vulnerable population. Okay? One incident real quick. I see how much time I have. I didn't really want to. Okay, plenty of time. So when he was 12, this is a big incident to him. When he was 12, this shows how bad his parents were. He saved his money forever. He had $30, went to the auction, and bought a calf, a beautiful baby calf. Okay? To keep forever. He wanted to take care of it, kept it in a certain spot in the barn. Okay? He really loved, he'd come home from the school, take care of it, spend, after he did all his chores and whatever. 2 weeks into having that calf, he came home and said, "Where's my calf?" His dad said, "Maybe go look out in the barn." He had chained up his calf and butchered his calf after 2 weeks of having it. Just a mean SOB. There's the word I was looking for. Okay? So stuff like this occurred all the time with him in his early childhood. He would hide into carcasses of big, like hogs. When he felt someone was being mean to him, he would go hide in carcasses. I mean, he had a hard life. Okay? So, but it doesn't excuse what he did, of course. Okay? So just a little bit of things that stuck out in his life that probably led to his depravity and his behavior, which is unfathomable, like I said. All right. Missed opportunities to save innocent lives. For the most part, again, society was a little bit marginalized to this population, but the criminal justice system and the police failed a lot of these women. Okay? They overlooked stuff. They didn't follow through with things. They could have saved lives if they would have cared. Okay? They weren't so apathetic towards prostitutes, the poor, etc. And there's all kinds of examples of where the police would lie to them and say they followed up, but they didn't. So it was just pathetic. Okay? So let's go to a timeline. With this timeline, I want you to Look at the opportunities. I pointed out a few, some of the big ones, but there was a lot of opportunities. But at his life, as far as a serial killer, okay? 1963 is when they moved from a farm close by to the farm in Port Coquitlam. Okay? He was almost 30 years old. The most comprehensive study on serial killers ever done, the average age of a male serial killer, guess what it is? 29 and a half years old. Again, you can take that however you want. But he's 29 and a half years old, moved to a farm, he's put to work, basically, essentially. Being an apprentice, he didn't want to do that. Being a butcher, he didn't want to do that. Okay? His father dies in 1978, and mother dies shortly, both of cancer. She was a lot younger than him, but they both died around the same time. So he was about 30 when his parents died. I'm sorry, I went back a little further, 63, he was 14. A lot of stuff started happening, but he was 30 at the time, 29 and a half being the average age. So, if he's a butcher, he's an apprentice of meat cutting, there aren't that many missing persons. On average, in a year beginning in 1978, 79, there'd be 0, there'd be 1 or 2, but in 1995, started to see increase. Does that mean he didn't kill between 1979 and 1985? No, he may have been working, learning. Butchering a pig is learning. That's was part of his MO, his signature. He was learning. But the evidence itself shows that the killing started, or the missing persons of prostitutes, was around 1995. But they found evidence to suggest it may have been earlier. But based on what I've noticed, he probably killed since the early 80s at least. Okay? March 21st, 1997. He brought a prostitute back to the trailer, just like his normal method. And when they were done having sex, he'd handcuff one of her wrists. Okay? So what did she do? She resisted. She grabbed a butcher knife from the kitchen, cut his throat, stabbed him, and he got it from her, and he did the same thing, stabbed her several times. At some point during the whole assault and confrontation, they both passed out. When she came to, he was still out bleeding. She ran off, escaped, flagged down a motorist with handcuffs on and bleeding to death. They picked her up and took her to the hospital. Okay? He came through, saw that she was gone. He went to the same hospital. Because that was the only hospital. He was bleeding. His throat was cut. He was bleeding, found his way to the hospital. Anyway, he was eventually charged with attempted murder. Okay? What do you think the apathetic response for prosecutors, police, and everything was? They charged him. They arrested him for attempted murder. They dismissed it. They put a stay on the case because she was a prostitute. She had a drug addiction, couldn't think clearly, and couldn't remember clearly. That was their excuse, that she didn't have the whereabouts to tell the truth. Okay? Big incident. Again, these are ones that they knew about, how they just put them aside. Now, I'm not talking about the ones they found out later after he was arrested and charged and convicted. They found all kinds of stuff that he did. Prostitutes would come forward, say, hey, I was assaulted by him. I was assaulted by him. I got away, that type of thing. So he had a lot of activities going on. Okay? So, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 2002, that's where we saw a height, as you can see in this timeline. A lot of missing women during these years from the downtown east side. Eventually, it would reach 69 people. They had a task force on missing persons. 69 women meeting this profile went missing from 1979 to 2001. This is a small percentage, less than 50% of all those women. So put the 2 and 2 together. Okay? Could have been another murder situation, because like London, people were murdered, prostitutes were murdered by other people. They were found dead for natural reasons or whatever the case, overdose. Okay? But anyway, that's the timeline, and of course, A lot of things were found. He confessed to 49 murders to an undercover officer while they're in jail. And he said that he wanted the big 5-0. He just got sloppy. That's what he told the undercover officer. He wanted 50 victims. And then he said to the undercover officer, what an idiot, because there's cameras and everything. But he's a cellmate, so we're good. He wanted to take a break after number 50 and kill 25 more. Do you think it would occur that the police didn't catch him because they're still marginalized? I'm glad something happened in 2012 in a public inquiry into this case. What we should have been doing for hundreds, 200, 300 years ago. All this time we should be treating them equally. And supposedly, now policy and procedures say you investigate just like any other missing person. Do you think the police maybe still have bias and the system still has bias, but they do it because they have to kind of thing? Yeah, it's a shame. Okay? All right. So there's the time. I got other stuff on here as far as the number of convictions, who was convicted or who was murdered and what the convictions. So how is it not first-degree murder? That might be one of your questions. Questions? (2007) of 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was originally charged with 27 counts of first-degree murder. But the court said, here was what the court said, we're only going to do 6. We don't want to burden the jury. We don't want it to last forever because there's millions of pages of documents, hundreds of thousands of things searched and found on the farm. So we didn't want to burden the jury. Okay. No, I think the same thing would happen. Again, Canada, their punishment for things are different. He got 25 years in prison, eligible at 25 years for parole. And then 17 years he was eligible for day parole, which is basically supervised, go into the community and then come back at night. So, but he didn't apply for that, and he ended up dying in prison. So we're all good. Yes?
So what's the difference between first and second?
First-degree murder is basically, where's my criminal law students? You raised your hand picking on, what's the difference between the two?
Well, the punishments are different.
Punishments are for sure different. But the inculpable mental state, what we call the intent, okay? You have to have a forethought, premeditated, taking time to deliberate on the matter before doing it. Where second degree is you actually killed somebody, but you don't have to show that culpable mental state of knowingly. So that's what they said. The jury said, well, he was involved. He killed the 6, but he didn't premeditate. It was just injustice. But the punishment for 6 was the same for 1 for second-degree murder in Canada, in 25 years in prison. So their punishments are less than ours. And so that was part of their whole premise of not doing the other 20, trying the other 20, was it doesn't matter. You still get the same. They don't do concurrent sentences. They charge. So what is that a strong message? Again, I'm not going to debate sentencing, but I mean, we always 50 life sentences. It's kind of stupid, but right? But depending on the crime, we stack and have more. But in this case, it didn't matter. 25 years is what he got for killing probably 60-some prostitutes who did not deserve. No one deserved it, but.
So it's not going to be for homicide, or is that just every single crime?
Every single crime. If you commit 6 auto thefts, remember that Gone in 60 Seconds by Nicolas Cage? Okay? How many cars did he? I mean, he tried to steal 50, but he would have been charged with 1 auto theft. Or 50 counts, but would given the same sentence for all, 50 to 1. Anyway, yes, sir. 1970 and 1980, yes. Or even earlier. Well, he got the freedom, he had the farm, he inherited the farm, so he had a crime scene, right? Remember we talked about there's no crime scene, well, he had a crime scene for how many, whatever years. So he was able to dispose of bodies easily through rendering plants, equipment that he had on the farm, bury the remains. There were heads, the 6 convictions, 3 of them, they found the heads cut in half, and along with their feet and hands in buckets. He used a reciprocal saw, a sawzall type, and just cut them just like a butchered pig right down the middle.
Can you talk about the weapon charges that he was?
Okay, who cares, right? That was part of the MO, and they used that, but yeah, he wasn't convicted of the weapons.
How did he die?
He was stabbed by another inmate with a broomstick to the head, impaled his head. Just murdered him by impaling his head with a broomstick. Well, I don't know what that was, but this person was known for assaulting other prisoners. So he was like 20 years younger. Picton was like 74, and he was like 51. So he's a little younger. Probably knew he was a serial killer. Now, should that have happened with a very high-profile prisoner like that? Who knows who was involved, but he was murdered with a broomstick. Okay, where are we at, Chad? You won't even need a microphone, do we?
No. What's the bad date from 2001?
Oh, that is a book that came out in 2001, right prior to him being arrested and charged for murder, that talks about the possibilities, the theories behind all these missing women. And one of his theories was, of course, a serial killer. One was there's docks and what do you call them? Waterways and where there's boats and stuff. There's a lot of crews that they were attacked by crew members. I mean, there's all kinds of theories, but he mentioned those in that book. Talked about the victims in that book. It's a good book.
Who figured it out? Who figured out that he was killing people? I know he confessed, but were they suspicious?
They were suspicious of him. I mean, remember our attempted murder with the prostitute where she got away? Dude, he'd have been a prime suspect right there as far as missing persons, but guess what? Under the rug they went. Yeah, it was just a matter of, again, the Green River Killer was a suspect. Also, and he wasn't really a suspect, Cliff Olson, you remember or know that name? He was a serial killer at the time in Vancouver, close by, that was killing children. His name was Cliff Wilson. Wasn't really a suspect because his MO and victims were different, but yeah. So just putting it all together, and of course the farm, searching the farm, right? 2 years searching. Can you imagine the resources? Hundreds of thousands of pieces of evidence, including DNA swabs. Hundreds. They took square inches of everything and swabbed it, collected, sifted through. It took a lot of people, university students, archaeologists, anthropologists, students were coming out to help. Hundreds of them. So they, yeah.
Besides the inquiry, was there a bigger public effect like the media wanted?
Oh yeah, the police were like under the gun. People were retiring, resigning. I mean, there was a lot of pressure. New chiefs were coming in, so there's a lot of. No one's asking about the meat that was sold. So the health department did not release anything until 2004 about contamination, maybe bacterial infections that were possible with human tissue in the meat. They didn't issue. So was there a drop in the ball with other areas of society? Yeah. Can you imagine today? Public announcement. If you got any meat, like pork, in the last 3 or 4 years, don't eat it because it could be human body. You're eating people. I'm pretty sure him and his family, well, they probably, whether they knew or not, were probably eating it. So there was some labeling of him as a cannibal as well, which I don't know. I'm sorry. Oh, okay, it did have a discolored it was more like lighter in color, but people really didn't notice. Yeah, the composition of human meat. Again, pigs are, as Dr. Betts had, pigs are very similar in a lot of ways to human beings, and sometimes very different too. But he learned how to butcher people. Okay. Yes, one more question? Yes. Do we have time, Chad? One more? I don't know. I'm thinking, there was theory about him being a cannibal as well, but again, anything's possible. I don't know. I never. Yeah.
Then the farm itself should have had other contaminations as well. Should the health department never check out?
Well, no, because a pig farm is a pig farm. It is what it is. It's not, there's nothing dirty about it. It's just a dirty job, right? So
He did sell his meat, like,
he would sell his meat locally to local butchers and meat shops. No, there was no reports of people getting sick, but I just imagine being told that, right? Okay, if you're interested, I have the references that I used primarily for this presentation. If you're interested, including that Bad Date book, that's a very good book if you're interested in this type of thing. So, well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming, buddy.